When you think of Barcelona, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's these incredible buildings that look like they've been pulled straight out of a dream. We're talking about undulating stone, columns that look like skeletons, and mosaics that just explode with color. And behind all of it, one man, Antoni Gaudí. An architect who didn't just design buildings, it's like he grew them right out of the ground.
But here's the thing that's so fascinating about Gaudi. Right from the very start, nobody could really decide, was this guy a once-in-a-generation genius, or was he just a complete madman? And honestly, that question followed him his entire life.
And look, this wasn't just some critic talking. These were the words of the director of his own architecture school on the day Gaudi graduated. Can you imagine? It just perfectly sets the stage for what would become one of the most unbelievable careers in the history of architecture.
So, to even begin to understand a mind like his, where do you start? Well, you have to go back to his very first, and maybe his greatest, teacher. And it wasn't a person. It was the natural world itself. See, his totally unique vision was really forged by two completely different worlds. On the one hand, you had the fire and metal of his family's workshop. They were coppersmiths, going back 5 generations, and he grew up watching them shape these huge three-dimensional objects. So from day one, he learned to think in space, not just on flat paper. But on the other hand, because he was a sickly kid, he spent a ton of time alone, just wandering the countryside, and he became this incredibly keen observer of the world around him.
And this is the key. He wasn't just looking at nature and thinking, oh, that's pretty. No, he was studying its engineering. He was looking at how a tree branches out to support its weight, how a human skeleton is somehow both incredibly light and unbelievably strong. He saw the math in the curve of a snail shell and the perfect geometry in a flower. For Gaudi, nature was the master architect, and he was just its humble apprentice.
So he took all these lessons from the workshop, from the wilderness, and he used them to invent a brand new language for architecture, a language that was about to break every single rule in the book.
But he didn't just wake up one day with this signature style. It was a journey. He started out in what's called his Orientalist phase, inspired by Eastern art, full of these amazing, vibrant tiles. Then he moved into a Neogothic phase, where he was trying to, in his words, perfect medieval cathedrals by getting rid of the big, bulky supports he called crutches. And finally, all of that experimentation came together in his famous naturalist style, the point where his buildings stopped looking like buildings and started looking like living things.
He also had to invent totally new techniques to make his vision a reality. One of the most famous is trencadís. He would literally take thrown-away ceramic tiles, smash them into pieces, and then reassemble them into these stunning, flowing mosaics. I mean, he was turning trash into treasure and creating these incredible curved surfaces that you just couldn't make with whole tiles.
And if you want to understand his structural genius, look no further than the catenary arch. It's brilliant. Instead of trying to draw the perfect arch, he would build a little model by hanging chains with weights on them. Gravity would naturally pull the chain into this perfect curve. Then, all he had to do was flip the design upside down. What you get is an arch that supports itself perfectly with zero need for outside help. He was using gravity to defeat gravity. It is absolutely genius.
Okay, so armed with this new, nature-inspired language, Gaudi set out to create some of the most iconic and jaw-dropping buildings the world has ever seen.
And let's be clear, he couldn't have done it alone. He needed a partner, and he found one in Eusebio Güell, a super wealthy industrialist who became his most important patron and his friend. Now, Güell gave Gaudi money, sure, but he gave him something way more important: complete and total creative freedom. And that partnership is what really let Gaudi's imagination run wild.
And the buildings that came from this partnership? Whoa. You've got Park Güell, the surreal fantasy playground that was actually built on the site of a failed housing project. Then there's Casa Batel, which looks like it was ripped right out of a fairy tale about a dragon, with its scaly roof and balconies that look like skulls. And of course, Casa Milà, which everyone calls La Pedrera, the stone quarry, because it looks like a giant cliff face carved by wind and water, without a single straight line in sight.
But of all his projects, one would rise above the rest. One would come to dominate his entire existence, becoming his life's ultimate obsession: the Sagrada Familia. He got involved just a year after they started building, and he immediately threw out the original plans. From that moment on, for the next 43 years, right up until the day he died, this incredible temple became his entire life. And his vision for it was just immense. The main tower, the one for Jesus Christ, is designed to be 170 meters tall. Now that's incredibly high,
but it's intentionally just a little bit shorter than the highest hill in Barcelona. For Gaudí, that was a crucial act of faith. The work of man, he believed, should never try to rise above the work of God.
This project didn't just change the skyline of Barcelona, it completely changed Gaudí as a person. When he was young, he was a total dandy, always dressed to the nines, loved fancy food, and would show up to his work sites in a horse-drawn carriage. But as he poured more and more of himself into the Sagrada Familia, he became almost a hermit. He stopped caring about his appearance and put everything he had into what he called his cathedral for the poor. He even said, "My great friends are dead, I have no family, no clients, no fortune. I can give myself totally to the temple."
And this profound transformation led to such a tragic, ironic end. In 1926, the 73-year-old Gaudí was on his daily walk to church when he was hit by a tram. Because of his ragged clothes and because he wasn't carrying any ID, people just assumed he was a homeless beggar. Taxi drivers actually refused to take him to a hospital because they thought he couldn't pay. By the time someone finally recognized him, it was just too late.
So what happened next? Well, after he died, it almost seemed like that old question, madman or genius, had finally been answered and not in his favor.
For a while, his work just fell completely out of fashion. Critics called it too weird, too over the top. And then, during the Spanish Civil War, things got even worse. Anarchists broke into his workshop at the Sagrada Familia and just destroyed almost all of his original plans and models, which, as you can imagine, threw the entire future of his masterpiece into doubt.
But remember what his school director said, "Time will tell," and boy, did it ever. Today, 7 of his works, including the Sagrada Familia, are recognized as UNESCO World Heritage sites. That's a huge deal. It's a global recognition of their incredible value to all of humanity.
And it's not just his work that's being recognized. His intense personal devotion has been too. His deep faith and simple life in his later years have actually led the Catholic Church to put him on the path to becoming a saint. He is now considered venerable, which is a major step. Which, of course, brings us all the way back to where we started. After everything we've seen, his life, his work, his legacy, how do we answer that question? Madman or genius?
You know, maybe the best answer comes from Gaudí himself. He believed beauty was just the splendor of truth. For him, he wasn't making up weird, fantastical things. He was just showing the world the truths he saw all around him, in the perfect engineering of nature and in the divine order of his faith. He wasn't building fantasy, he was building truth. And when you think about it like that, what could possibly be more brilliant?